It's Christina Herrick, host of Tip of the Iceberg and produce editor for The Packer, and I'm here with another episode of Tip of the Iceberg. Today, joining me is Steve Statler, Chief Marketing Officer for Wiliot. Steve is a return guest. I feel like I need to start having prizes for return guests. So, Steve, we're going to talk a little bit about some updates and some company updates, and talk a little bit more about food safety and AI. So, thank you for joining me, Steve.
Well, it's a real honor to be asked back, Christina. Great to see you online, and we've bumped into each other in person at some of these events. So I feel like we're starting to get to know each other.
Yeah, I tell people sometimes I feel like I'm Beetlejuice, like you say my name 3 times and I just magically appear at some event. Kind of where I wanted to start with everything is just Steve, maybe give us a refresher. I mean, there's a few technology solutions out there. Kind of talk about what Wiliot is, and then we can kind of dovetail into some of those new updates.
Yeah, well, we describe ourselves as an ambient Internet of Things company, which may puzzle people more than it explains. So what we have is battery-free Bluetooth tags, which are a bit like an Apple AirTag, but rather than $30, they're between 10 and 30 cents, and they're the size of a postage stamp. And you can think of this as the latest version of radio frequency identifier technology. It does use radio waves. Bluetooth is a radio. But rather than using expensive $1,000 handheld scanners to get visibility into inventory and supply chain assets, you basically use commodity radios that are super cheap. So rather than these $1,000 readers, your Bluetooth reader can either be free because you've already got a Bluetooth device, or it can be like less than $50. And the result of that is that you can basically have readers everywhere so that you don't have to use manual techniques to scan things. You just sense the presence of your inventory. And so it's a no-labor solution for tracking where the inventory is in your store. And all of these Bluetooth devices are also temperature sensors. So in some ways, they're more functional than an Apple AirTag. And so you get this real-time cold chain visibility, and you can start to see spot handling issues. You can get a real-time location readout of the flow of produce. So you can see issues like the flow of product through the back of a store or the back of a packing shed. It should be first in, first out, but sometimes it ends up being last in, first out, and that ends up with issues where it can result in waste, where products are not as fresh as they should be when they get moved on to the next stage in the supply chain. So we can help preempt that and basically tell people when something needs attention, and also tell people where products came from, provenance, handling issues, visibility into even the carbon footprint of their products is one of the things that we're excited about pioneering.
So I'm kind of interested too in hearing a little bit about how AI factors into this. And I know Wiliot just released WillyBot. So I you kind of set the stage for, what the technology is. But now, where does that come in? Where does AI come into that? And kind of, I know we use there's the term machine learning as well. Kind of maybe break some of that down for our listeners that may not be as technologically advanced.
Yeah, sure. So artificial intelligence covers a lot of different algorithms and techniques, and we don't need to get into the super detailed analysis of that. But we have used AI for some time in our system because these tags, unlike a barcode or an RFID tag where you only get data when you scan them, they're constantly broadcasting the location and the temperature of the inventory, and they communicate in very low-level data packets, which none of our customers are terribly interested in. They want to understand events. They want to know that a shipping event like a whether something's been received or whether it's been shipped, or if there's a temperature excursion issue, maybe the strawberries have just been frozen on the way to the store. That's a real life example of an event. So we've been using AI and machine learning specifically to distill this tsunami of radio packets and turn them into business events, which are basically calls, alerts that can be passed on to an inventory management system, a supply chain or warehouse management system, and result in a message going to a worker who can then hopefully preempt what could turn into waste or quality issues. So that's been going on for some time. And as we've been scaling our deployments, you can potentially have a lot of events, a lot of shipping events, a lot of receiving events. And one of the analysts that I get the privilege of talking to has described what we do as delivering omniscience, this kind of godlike ability to see everything everywhere all at once. And I think if anyone really got omniscience, they'd probably go crazy, because it would be overwhelming. If you could see everything that's going on in the world, then I don't think the human brain could handle it. But actually, AI loves data. In fact, there's reports of the AI industry running out of data and wanting data that can be useful and have a return on investment. And it turns out there's lots of data in supply chains, and if you master it, you can save money, you can make money, you can have fresher produce. And so AI and this other form of AI, which is the LLMs, the large language models, are really well suited to allowing people to do something which we've been talking about for ages. We've been posing the question, what if your products could talk? And that's been a metaphor for someone kind of using an analysis tool to understand what's happening in the supply chain. But if you put an LLM in there, if you put AI in there, then you literally can have a conversation with a chatbot. And in our case, it's Wiliot, but it could be someone else's LLM. It doesn't have to be ours, but we decided to build this out just to show what could be done. And you can have a conversation with Wiliot about your supply chain and start to ask some questions that go beyond what you would achieve with a simple database query. So that's kind of the two kinds of AI. There's kind of the low-level machine learning, which turns the data packets from tags into events. But then you add these chatbots, these LLMs, so that you can start to have a conversational interface and make sense of all of these events and turn them into business insights.
Yeah, well, and I think, when we talked before, part of what was interesting with those events created is kind of what's happening with FSMA 204, where you have to track food and any kind of event that happens, harvest, any transportation packet, all of the steps that take a piece of produce harvested all the way to the retailer and then to the consumer. That's where that tracking is really helpful. And then what I thought was really interesting, and at least what I understood from the press release on Wiliot, is that now, I was thinking in a case where there might be a recall of a particular product, a consumer, because it sounds like even at some point consumers might be able to interact with this and use Wiliot. That a consumer could almost find out whether or not, I'm going to pick on cantaloupe just because cantaloupe there's a cantaloupe recall. Mm-hmm. But, it could be any kind of produce. You could find out whether or not that particular piece of produce in the lot code is involved in the recall or not. And I think that would be interesting. And there's a lot there. So, I think that's kind of what I'd love to talk a little bit more too about, is just kind of talking about some of those solutions and maybe thinking about even like a retailer, a grocery store, and how they might use Wiliot and the information that both Wiliot tracks, and then how to get that maybe broken down into information that they're able to maybe understand or digest a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And when we've shown Wiliot working, and we've focused on it as an enterprise tool, as a co-pilot for workers that might be stocking shelves, or a store manager, or a regional manager, or a category manager, even asking questions about what's happening. So that's been our initial focus. But every time we show it to people, then, we're all consumers as well. And you're like, well, I want to know if this is safe and how fresh this is and how long it's likely to last. And so, we have seen when retailers have cut costs and they've removed the staff from behind the counter, and people are just expected to inform themselves by reading the labels, that sales go down. People like to talk and get answers about food. And in a sense, Wiliot can be that conversational interface that allows you to have a conversation about the food. And there's a lot of questions that people have. And I was talking to Frank Yanis, who was on with me on your show last time. And I have the privilege of chatting with him every other week, sometimes every week, about what we're doing with food safety, and what's happening with the regulations and the customers that we're both working with. But I was amused that he shared with me, he's a pretty experienced, prestigious guy, used to lead the food safety side of the FDA, ex-head of food safety at Walmart and at Disney. And what's the question that his friends ask him the most? Is this pork chop that I've had it for a week in my fridge safe to eat? And so I think we do have questions about freshness and food safety and ambient Internet of Things, the ability to not just know that the product is there, but how it has been handled. What is the temperature history and the handling history? Was that product left out on the store floor when it should have been put away? And we see a lot of incidences of that can now be corrected. But the reality is you can have a handling issue and the food can be good. It can be fine. But if you can keep track of that over time, then you can go beyond the use by date and the expiry date, which, let's face it, this system was developed around the era of prohibition. It's like over 100 years old. And we're essentially still using the expiry dates that were originally advocated by Al Capone, of all people. When one of his relatives got sick, he used aggressive lobbying to have expiry dates put on milk. And I think everyone believes, yes, this is a good idea. We need the dates, but also everyone knows that they can be wildly inaccurate. You can have stuff that should be good that isn't. And the reverse is true, something that the use by date and even the expiry date have gone past, and they're perfectly fine. And that's because it's kind of a theoretical date. But with the ambient Internet of Things, we can actually have a much more scientific view of how this has been handled in the real world. The good, the bad, the ugly can go in and tell us, can we keep that for another couple of days, or can we eat it? So I am looking forward to being able to talk to my phone, to have it analyze what's in my fridge and tell me what I need to eat when. And I actually have started putting R tags on the things in my fridge at home. But unfortunately, what I don't have is the data pipeline that starts at the farm and goes all the way and tells me. But that's the opportunity. That's where it's going to go. And I think an LLM that can help you with recipes and even push and warn you that it's time to eat that those tomatoes that have been in the back of the drawer in your fridge that you've forgotten about. I mean, that would be great. So I think that is where we're going. But there's a bunch of use cases that are actually in some ways more sophisticated and can unlock savings and profit opportunities that we're really focused on today.
Well, and as you were talking, I mean, the other big thing I think is food waste, right? That's obviously something that this particular both Wiliot and Willybot play into is food waste. I was thinking this happened to me not too long ago, and so I know if I was experiencing, retailers did too. We had a huge storm come through and knock out power for several days. Obviously, there was a lot of food that would not be safe to eat. Once you've hit couple days, even in a freezer that you haven't opened, or a fridge. But there was some fresh, frozen produce that probably could have been fine. And I
Yes.
was thinking more on a retailer level, you're able to have that data. Maybe they were able to get somewhere else to cold store the product, so that it wasn't a complete loss, and they could use that information to find out which items had crossed the threshold and were no longer safe to sell, and what items would be safe to sell, and all of the information in between. And I think that would be really interesting too. It's just kind of finding that fine line. um
Absolutely, it's a balance, and anyone that wants to see this in action, they can go to the Wiliot YouTube channel and they can see that some of these conversations happening. But to save you the effort, what we do show is how you can balance what was really challenging in the past, which was how do I get good on-shelf availability? No one likes to see products missing.
yeah.
But you don't want to have a huge buffer that drives up waste. And it used to be, well, either I have good on shelf availability with waste, or low waste and low availability. But you really, if you can see everything everywhere all at once, then you can really have micro decisions being made that allow you to have the best of both worlds, and also answer questions like, rather than a FIFO in the back of the store, a first in, first out, you can have a FEFO, a first expired, first out. And the expiry calculation can be based on temperature over time of that particular case of produce. And so these start to get very sophisticated
Yeah.
questions that you ask. If you're asking which case of produce should I move from the back of the store to the front of the store to balance food safety and waste. And then it takes an AI to really do that. A data analyst doing a SQL query would struggle to do that, and certainly a store manager or an ops lead or just someone that's stocking shelves is probably not going to have the time or the inclination. And at best, they're going to look at the expiry date. But with AI and all of that continuous history, then you can start to balance that and do other calculations like the carbon footprint, which
Yeah.
One banana is not necessarily the same as the other banana in terms of its carbon footprint. It depends on how far it's traveled, how it's been stored,
Yeah.
whether it's been, what the utilization is of the vehicles that it's been transported in. And so, we have the opportunity, either through electronic shelf labels or mobile apps, to expose that information to the people that are handling the product. And carbon basically equals cost. If you're traveling far, if you're storing products in inefficient cooling, if you've got poor utilization of a delivery vehicle, that's going to be bad for carbon, but it's also going to drive up costs. So I think it's going to be in everyone's interest to go from looking at their carbon footprint once a year to looking at it in real time, and then sharing that data with consumers so that they feel empowered. And I think retailers that move in that direction will not just get loyalty, but they'll probably be able to charge more for their product. I know that I pay more for the products that I buy from the local organic store because they just have a handwritten sign that says this came from a farm that was 20 miles away. But how do you scale that? And I think ambient IoT is a way of scaling that and allowing people to understand more about where the product came from and how it was handled, which makes the food more enjoyable as well as
Yeah.
taste better.
Well, and that's information people want. I mean, I think that's one trend I've just noticed in my short time here with the Packer is just how much information consumers want now. And some of that just comes with, all of us having handheld computers that have information at our fingertips. So now people are going, well, if I can look up X, Y, and Z on the internet, how come I can't learn that about what I'm consuming? And there is information there too, but I think what's interesting is you're kind of simplifying that data so someone's able to really, they don't have to hunt for it, they're able to find it. And I think that's really interesting. And the other point about carbon footprint, I think we're just going to be hearing more and more and more about that, carbon reporting. And so yes, starting to be able to help the entire produce food chain track that, I think will be important, because I do think more retailers are going to put an emphasis on that, which will then mean it trickles down all the way from harvest and then back up to retailers. So that's really interesting to hear that's a part of the package too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you. I am fascinated by talking to these large language models, and I'm a history geek, so I'm like kind of having a conversation about why the 100 Years' War went on for 100 years. And this is all very kind of esoteric, but to be able to talk to Siri and ask about some food that is I'm considering buying or I have bought, that is like really useful. And so sometimes you have these discussions and it all sounds a little far-fetched, but I was listening to the new iPhone 16 product launch, and we're going to have an amazing amount of AI processing power. And I think it's just really important that those AI engines get linked to the real world, so that we're not just asking about the 100 Years' War, that we can have a conversation about something that is going to have some real benefits in terms of saving money, saving carbon, reducing waste, and hopefully have better tasting food. I mean, if we can do a better job
that's the goal
of handling this, the fruit, the vegetables, we can start breeding them for flavor rather than resilience. Eating a resilient strawberry is probably not as good as eating one that's been bred for flavor, knowing that it will actually be cared for properly.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a very good point. And you're right, that is the end game, right? We want healthy and safe and delicious produce, and however we can have that happen is, I think, the ultimate goal for the industry. So we're at an interesting point in the conversation, because I love talking about where the future's headed, especially with technology like this, understanding that things change very rapidly, right? I'm sure people could have predicted where the iPhone 16 was going to go product wise, but maybe 2 or 3 years ago that might not have been necessarily a possibility. I think people seem to be able to predict what's going to happen months out. But so where do you see AI in the fresh produce industry, and kind of thinking about how broad the fresh produce industry is? Where do you see it going? Where's the future taking us? And what should our listeners and readers be paying attention to in terms of AI and its role in the fresh produce industry in the future?
Well, I think that there's AI as an app fundamentally, and apps only work if there's a platform. So one hand, I hope people are excited by the possibility of having a co-pilot, not just for the CEO or the store manager, but the person that's driving the delivery vehicle and stocking the shelves, and is taking stress out of their life and helping them do a better job. People want to do a better job, and they want to have customers that are smiling and happy rather than upset because they're bringing something back because it was bad by the time they got it home. So I think the future is about you can call them co-pilots. Gartner called them machines as customers. And so I think, you can look further ahead and say, well, if I am talking to Siri about the food that I want, this is like taking omni-channel, the ability to buy online and pick up in store, or buy online and have it delivered to your home. And it potentially takes it even further, whereby if I'm talking to Siri or whoever my favorite ChatGPT to order my food, then that potentially is disruptive to retailers. And there's a lot of distressed property out there, retailers who have shut down. Someone could come in, buy that up, start to be an intermediary between producers and consumers, so that the AI could open that up. Or this could be an opportunity for your Albertsons or your Walmart to start offering more of that product as a service, subscription service, conversational interface. There's a lot to play for, and I think this disruption of technology, as it frequently does, sort of throws things up in the air, and we'll see who moves fastest to utilize it. But none of this is possible without good data. So, apps need an app store, they need a platform, and you can ask all the questions you like, but if people are not putting the tags on the cases and the pallets, and eventually on the individual items, and they're not sharing the data up and down the supply chain, then none of this is possible. And so I think it behooves the industry to kind of use this as a wake-up call to modernize the data sharing, start to use some of the GS1 standards around EPCIS, the Electronic Product Code Interchange Standard, which allows you to go beyond EDI and start to share the information about how the product was handled in the farm, how it was handled in distribution, how it's handled in the store. And then ultimately, that is the source of the data that these agents will happen. And I think if the incumbents don't do that, then this technology, and there's huge amounts of capital available for people that will use it to disrupt things. And so I think someone's going to do it. Someone's going to join it all up. And I think the pressure is on to not just deliver the apps, but to deliver the infrastructure, the platform that will join the real physical world with this exciting virtual world that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just did a story not too long ago on 2D barcodes, and I kind of see this playing into that. I mean, that's another point of connection with consumers. And so you've kind of, and we already talked about kind of that need for data tracking anyway within FSMA 204. So you're kind of, I feel like there's momentum happening to
Yes.
get this data moving. But, in the story I wrote, one of my sources was saying, that it's been an antiquated system for a long time. And it's kind of been that way. And fresh produce hasn't really had to be a part of the barcodes and updating and tracking in a way that they're going to have to. So it'll be really interesting, you're right, to see kind of where things go. It's definitely, I feel like there's momentum, but you're right, it would be interesting to see what kind of players within the industry or even outside that come in and try to connect and try to bridge these gaps and share this data, because like you said, good data is the most important part of making AI function the way we want it to.
Well, you raise a really good point, Christina. And FSMA to me is a catalyst.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge, and it is challenging. And so it's an opportunity for companies, and they can decide, well, we'll do the minimum. We'll maybe compromise on accuracy, and we'll have assumed receipt rather than confirmed receipt, because we'll probably get away with it for a while, especially if we're not like the biggest. Or you can say, No, this is actually a signal that we need to automate and get the data systems in place. And so basically, if you look at it holistically, and sadly, it's not in the gift of the head of food safety to do this. It's got to be a team decision by the management team that they are going to say, okay, we're going to put the auto ID systems in place so that we can do FSMA, but we can go beyond compliance and use this as a way of being more competitive. I think there's a lot to be said in this world of mergers and acquisitions that the party that has shown that they can use the technology to gain an advantage tends to get the valuation that allows them to be in the driving seat in the M&A world. In the same way as the banks that did a better job of automating check processing were the ones that gobbled up the other banks. So I think the same applies in retail, and especially food retail, where automation is really key. No one's going to be doubling the number of workers in the back of the store, but they need to make more of those workers available to smile and build relationships with customers. And so the only way that's going to happen is if they're spending less time trying to find things and more time telling stories about the product and building the relationships. And people have huge loyalty when they start to build relationships with the staff. There's a Facebook group just around one guy that works at our local CVS that everyone loves. And I don't know, this guy's probably earning minimum wage, but I'm sure he's happier because his customers love him. And if you give these workers the tools so that they can be successful, then you're going to keep them and you're going to have less churn, and it'll be a better experience going to the store, as well as a more profitable one for the people that are running the stores.
Well, I think that's a great way to end the conversation. I don't think there's anything else, anything else we need to cover at this moment. I mean, that kind of ended it perfectly there. So, I do want to thank you, Steve, for coming on. You're welcome to come back anytime. As you know, with the tip of the iceberg, we just basically get to, as the name says, tip of the iceberg on a lot of these topics. So, I always say my door is metaphorically open. You're welcome to come back and come on the podcast anytime. And thank you again for joining me.
Oh, Christina, it's a real pleasure. I love our conversations and I love your podcast. And I think it's very aptly named Tip of the Iceberg. People think that everyone shops. Everyone thinks that they understand the way this business works, but there's so much more below the surface than people understand. And it's really fun getting to understand it with you. So thanks for the invitation.
And you wrote a commercial for us too. My gosh, what can't you do? So while I'm thanking people, I should thank our viewers and listeners for tuning in. And don't forget, if you like what you hear, you can catch new episodes of Tip of the Iceberg on your favorite podcast platform like Google, Spotify, Apple, and more. And that's a wrap for this edition of Tip of the Iceberg, brought to you by Produce Market Guide, The Packer, and Farm Journal. Join us again soon for more industry insights. Bye.